welcome to Beyond Ray. This is Kate. I'm joined by Ginger, and today's episode is sort of special because all four of us are going to be designers that are local to Seattle. Christine Riesinger, our guest today, is a UW alum like Ginger and I, and went on to work in product design and development for 17 years, 10 of which were at Wizards of the Coast, with a focus on Magic the Gathering. She started as a packaging designer there before growing to manage the packaging team, and then becoming the principal creative in research. Welcome, Christine.
Hi, it's great to be here. I'm very excited to talk to y'all.
We are too. And then I also wanted to take a moment to welcome Treasure Hines, who's been a guest in the past and is now actually our newest member of the WID Seattle team, which is really exciting. Treasure, can you tell our audience a little bit about you?
Hi, sure. My name is Treasure Hines. I just recently joined WID Seattle. Prior to this, I co-owned Anvil Studios for 15 years. That's here in Seattle. And then prior to that, I started my career down in San Francisco and then used my various design positions as an opportunity to work in Europe and Asia, and before returning to Seattle around year 10 of my career when I started Anvil Studios.
Well, let's kick this off with maybe not everyone knows what goes into working at Wizards of the Coast. Maybe explain a little bit about what happened over those different roles and maybe what brought you to working there. Because as I recall, you were not initially someone that played a bunch of games, played tabletop card games and stuff. So was there anything that took you there in particular?
Yeah, I did not grow up playing Magic the Gathering. I'm not, I learned to play while I was there. I played more Hasbro games, board games, that kind of stuff casually. I actually got connected with Wizards of the Coast because a friend of mine who was a graphic designer was contracting there and started to contract there myself. And then while I was contracting there happened to be an open position where they were recruiting for a structural packaging designer. And the manager there at the time kind of reached out and was like, hey, there's this role that might be a good fit for you. And then I kind of just went through that process and luckily got hired on. And the team there at the time, there was one other structural packaging designer that had been there for a few years. So it was this kind of small team that had a industrial design background, kind of starting up that team that kind of didn't really exist before with more of that industrial design mindset. And the director there at the time, I think, kind of saw that vision to bring that role in and grew that team from there. So that part was really fun.
That sounds nice to kind of get in at this ground level of creative work there. Was there kind of a vision of what that growth of the creative work and team was going to be? And was that laying a path for you to walk?
I think my manager and the director at the time kind of had this vision for what this could be. And they had that one person who was doing it solo. And I think identified that opportunity and growth. And that's why they opened up that position. So it was really great to be able to go in there and work on the focus of what it's like to think about packaging from a external marketing standpoint, but also pushing form language and line look and opening experiences depending on whether it's for a new player or for some sort of more higher end collectability, what kind of different experiences you want to do to surprise and delight players. And so that's kind of where some of those explorations went. And what was fun at the time is higher percentage of work was more towards Magic the Gathering, but early on in my career, we were able to kind of work on everything. So we got to work on board games and how when people open up a board game, how you punch out some of those pieces, what happens after you take those things apart and put it back together. Got to work on some, dice kits for Dungeons and Dragons, work on a Japanese brand called Duel Master. So the market there and the type of packaging is a little bit different than what a US market is. So kind of being able to play in those different categories was pretty, I like the diversity of being able to kind of play in all those areas.
Right.
So that's interesting. I didn't realize that when you started, it sounds like not only were you new to the team, but the team as being a design element within the company was also a new endeavor.
I think for structural design specifically, it was a smaller team that they were slowly building. Now they have more of a packaging engineering team that's, I think, a bit bigger and more integrated with the development side and working with the vendor side. But yeah, it was generally newer-ish. It was more focused, I think, on graphic design was definitely heavy, or it was that kind of work was more directly worked with vendors who provided that versus that structural team at the time was kind of bringing that a little bit more in-house to be able to concept and drive some of those things based off of what the brand and team was wanting and then proposing that elsewhere.
Yeah, it's nice to understand how much more part of the experience packaging is that you worked on than maybe the way we think about packaging in other spaces. I can definitely see why that would have brought you in to the company with a lot of interest. Can you talk a little bit about how that job then started to grow into you managing that role and then ultimately joining the research side of things?
Yeah, so I was in the structural design role for a few years as a designer and a senior designer. There was essentially an opportunity that came up to fill the manager position. What interested me about that is when you're a structural designer, that's probably the area where my work was more tied to traditional ID, right? Where you get this kind of problem statement, you're working towards a certain objective, you get to sketch and concept and render physical prototypes, work with vendors, and work through the manufacturing process of what's efficient while also driving design and experience, cost constraints, all that other stuff. For me, what always kind of also interested me is more beyond like, okay, there's a problem statement. Why is it that we're wanting this to be a thing? Looking a little bit more on the company direction and strategy. So I wanted to get more involved in the bigger picture. It also interested me looking a bit beyond just my section of design and looking at, hey, and there is overlap, right? Like even in that role, you work closely with art directors and you're working with graphic designers on, hey, if there are certain things, what are the things that we need to consider for how certain imagery wrap? Or, hey, this is going to be the type of branding that's going to be important on this front-facing thing versus how someone from a store who is going to be leading an event, when they open up something from a shipper box, like what's going to be the information that they're going to need for it to be useful for them. So there's the consumer side, there's the store owner side, all those things, and working and collaborating with all these different design teams. I kind of got a viewpoint from there. But, for me, I think my industrial design background that I feel like is the common thread through everything that I'm doing is I always kind of liked being a problem solver and taking these different pieces and figuring out, oh, these are the flags, or how can I streamline or help other people succeed. And I think that's kind of where it led me personally a little bit more towards that quote unquote manager track. So I still like working on things and the tangible and doing things. Like even as a manager, I ended up getting brought closer into the actual tacticals, or right, like being a SMEAM, being able to provide specific feedback on a design, or hey, when things are in a crunch, like me going in and cleaning up die lines and stuff in order to meet deadlines. I can do all those things, but really as a manager, you are understanding all those things within the design needs of your team. And the success is like providing direction, having those harder conversations up top so that you are removing all those barriers for your team to succeed. And I enjoy doing that part of it as well.
Nice. Do you think that with all those years of experience and you're moving up and doing people management, when you had to like get in and do detailed design work, were you like, this is a bad situation and like, unfortunately, I have to put up and do this? Or was it like, oh, great, I get to do this once in a while and you're like happy to return to it?
Yeah, I think that's like the thing that I am in right now in my phase of my career figuring out. I think I toggle back and forth because like for me personally, I didn't mind, but it was more in the mentality of helping people out, right? It's not well, I think I can do it better than you, so let me step in and let me do these concepts. It's really like resource wise, like, hey, we got a lot of things going on. We need to make things work. Let's work as a team. Okay, this is something that I can do to help make sure that the team can focus on these other things. I can just wrap up this detail to make sure that everything, like the bigger ship is still moving.
Gotcha.
That was in my more manager role when I was a people manager. But when I was in the principal position for creative research, that one was different because that one I wasn't a people manager. I was a individual contributor. So for that role, definitely I toggled a little bit more in regards to having conversations with leadership about goals or things that are future planning pipeline stuff, but then also working with research teams or creative teams and figuring out like how we're going to make that work and creating schedules, or for research being able to be like, hey, these are the needs for the Magic Studio. What's the best way in which we can get this type of feedback? And then being able to kind of collaborate with researchers to be like, hey, for this focus group, based on this need, what would be the makeup of the audience of those focus groups, and like having that collaborative conversation that is more detailed, relying on their expertise, but being like, hey, what do you think about this? Or this is, based on the conversations I'm having, I'm not sure about that. What do you think about this? So that part's, I had a pretty good relationship with some of the different broader teams there, which also made it really fun and allowed me to learn new different things.
Yeah.
Were you an IC before transitioning into people manager, or was it the other way around?
So I was an IC for structural packaging when I became the manager of the broader packaging team. Oh, that was art directors, graphic designers, structural designers.
Okay.
I was a
Got it.
people manager.
Got it.
After that, I became an IC again.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Hmm.
And then you're on a hiatus. I'm
I am
curious
on a
to talk
hiatus
about.
currently.
I'm personally interested in talking about that because I'm also on a hiatus. And
Yes.
as we were talking before about what does that feel like? How does that feel to take that hiatus after really diving into something so strong for 10 years? Can you talk a little about your feelings around that one? I know like immediately there's like some relief, right? There's like a chill section. And then now it's, once you've been in it for a while, what is that feeling, right?
Yeah, like it was tough for me because Wizards was definitely my longest term place where I've been. And I wore so many different hats and grew a lot within that organization. I made a lot of amazing friends. And I was doing interesting work too. I hit that 10-year mark and there were other things happening within my life at that time, right? It was like a little bit post-COVID. I was dealing with a child having some health issues, etc. And I just kind of had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do next. And for me, I decided that having a hiatus was the right move for me. It still took me a while. And even in my heart of hearts, when I know that it's the right decision and at the end of the day, I'm not going to look back and regret on it.
Yeah.
First year, I want to
Yeah.
say, was still moments of me being like, what did I do? It was great. Like, why am I complaining? Why did I leave this great thing? And I think part of that is kind of that detox of you had like since college, I had this identity of building and growing to be a designer and being able to be like, hi, my name is Christine Lee. I'm this title. And
Yeah.
I like we're saying like so much of our identity is tied to this thing. And when I left initially, I was like, it's just going to be a 6 months thing. Now I've hit 3 years. We could talk more about that. But it became this like, oh, I'm just taking a quick time off to like, I can't really say that anymore. And I don't have a specific title right now. And so you kind of do this weird cursory of not exactly knowing what you're saying, but it doesn't mean that I'm not still growing. I'm not driven.
And you're still a designer.
I'm
I
still a
struggle with the
designer,
same
even if
thing.
even as a manager, I haven't like actually
Yeah.
been in SolidWorks and catted up something in a few years.
Right.
Like I still in my brain mentality know that I'm a designer, but I still sometimes I feel like a little less confident about being like, yeah,
I feel exactly the same
right?
way. Yeah. I noticed like when I was explaining, introduced myself at the beginning of this, I was like, what do I say now? I didn't realize how much I was tied to my title or to whatever titles or labels are. But exactly, since college, I've known how to say who you are, what you do, where you work. And now it's like, am I treading? And I don't know why it feels awkward. Like, I know I'm a designer. I know I'm studying art, right? There's like this thing, like, why does it feel awkward when you don't have a position? Yeah.
That's super important to talk about because I just feel like taking breaks is so important. But maybe designers have a harder time with that than some other professions, like because we're so emotionally tied to the things that we're doing. I guess that would be my theory. But what are the things that you guys both feel, I guess, have like grown or continued to be really, really present in the way that you look at objects or things or problems that you feel like make you know that you're still very much a designer, even if you're not like at a company?
I still kind of do CAD in my head sometimes when I'm trying to figure something out.
I love that.
The thing that I think I focus on a lot is part of my hiatus is I'm raising a child. And it's really important to me that I teach the value of failure and that failure isn't failure. And it's such a huge part of the design thinking process that it's not a negative and you need to fail to learn and grow. And I just feel like in the education system where people don't highlight this as a positive enough. And so I find that when I'm parenting, I will fall to my like design thinking flags.
Sometimes I still try to do some form of, creativity, whether it's through, for a while I was trying to do it through cooking, and that has its ups and downs. I also have 2 kids and my oldest is really into art and drawing and wants to be an artist when he grows up. But, my drawing was very much like for years, like packaging and boxes and stuff. And he's drawing human figures and so forth. And he'll look at me. I'm like, I did go to design school, but yes, your drawing's so much better than mine. Yes, I need to work on that, And I worked with, at Wizards, these amazing concept artists who are so amazing at human figures. And then I have to remind myself, that's not the kind of art, like background design that I, went through classes. I didn't do a ton of the human figure classes. It's okay, Christine. Like, I don't have to be great at everything.
Or the dragon figure classes.
Oh yeah, or the dragon figures, and world concepting and that kind of stuff. So I think, Treasure, what kind of resonates with me is I know in my brain about the design thinking and failure is okay and you iterate and try again.
Yeah.
And it's critical. for some reason, I think it's interesting for me that I don't mind the iterative process is really natural to me in design, but
Yeah.
the being okay to fail part for me has been something that's been hard for me even pre like design education. And I think for me, part of that transition, and I want to be mindful about how I raise my kids and and I actually actively think about it's okay, like as long as you try, as long as you persevere,
Yeah.
you just keep going and trying it. But for me, I make it so that it's fine for other people, but for some reason I still put this pressure on myself that I have to be great and perfect.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I think part of that transition for me, even in like going into parenthood and that kind of stuff, was a big shocker because the things that used to work for me didn't work anymore. And I think that kind of added to, there were many reasons for my hiatus. Some of it was a little bit of a burnout, but the way that I used to work wasn't working anymore when there were all these other demands that were coming, right? Like when I was single, I had all the time in the world to kind of figure out and place those things. And now there are these external factors that made it that I just had to work differently than I was used to. And so it was, again, reinventing myself of like, okay, like how do I manage all of these different moving pieces and puzzles?
The management.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the management. And sometimes like I was really good at the management and like check, but now it's like, oh, I did that thing and my kids ruined it in 5 seconds. And now it looks like I didn't do anything. Oh, but I need to be okay with it and I need to go with the flow and it's okay. And life happens and it's just kind of figuring out how to roll with that.
It's interesting to think about taking like your design self and your design skills into your personal life and your family. I'm wondering actually the other way around, like maybe what you would have been doing in your work to think about like designing games and toys and products that like a lot of kids would use. I mean, some of it is just like Magic is hugely popular with adults, but they were kids once.
Yep.
And this idea of like what your design and research, like what that impact is having on that user group, like were you thinking about it in a specific way because the users, many of them are kids?
So for a lot of the work that I was doing actually for like with Magic, it's a higher age group than kind of like the toys that you're designing for Hasbro, right? Like they aim a little bit younger audience. Again, obviously there are players who are adults who play Monopoly and all that stuff, but the age bracket is lower. For Magic, they're essentially like 8 and 12 up. So they're a little older. Even my son who's at 7 isn't quite, there yet. We're actually kind of endeavoring more into the early stage of Pokemon.
Okay.
And so, but even that is interesting because I have this 10 years of experience working on trading card games.
Yeah.
And we talk about pathing and we talk about how different players enter the ecosystem of TCG. And part of it is like, yeah, they start with Pokemon and they're a great pathway to get entered into Magic. And so being able to learn and think about, hey, how do players engage in the game? Not only in the early pathing, but one of the big things that they were focusing on when I was there was, hey, Magic, they might have this reputation that it's only for the serious gamers who's really into it and it's not, as friendly, but it's not. And I don't believe that's anymore. And a lot of the focus was really the idea of play is for everyone. And it's just kind of identifying what are the different ways that you can get engaged in that game. For me, like, yeah, my entrance to a game might not be like the intricacies and strategies, but man, when I started to learn about the stories and the world and the characters, I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. Like that might be a way for me to get into the game. And then another thing that they were exploring at the time, Magic takes a long time to develop, right? Like things take, 2+ years to get out into the market from when it's being developed. But at the time, which is now very, common and promoting right now, is the Universes Beyond, which is, this partnership between Magic and other IPs. And again, looking at, hey, there are these other IPs that players have fandom over, and how can we bring other people into the game? Because there actually is that commonality, and there is this gateway that these players would likely find interesting to bring into the Magic ecosystems. So just that part of it is really what kind of kept me really interested in working at Wizards for so long, is this strong player base and really being able to dive into the really enfranchised experienced players, but also like how to keep those players engaged, but also how do you make it friendly and interesting for new players to come into the ecosystem, and really focusing on that user. I think also what got me more into that, a little bit more of that research track.
Right.
Speaking of friendly to new users, I'm like the most novice, I think, in this group of understanding the game. And so my little flag is going off of like, maybe our audience doesn't really know how it works either. Do you think you could provide like a little simple explanation of gameplay and some of these storylines you mentioned? Or is that like too complicated to summarize?
I mean, Magic the Gathering is what they call a TCG, which is a trading card game.
Mm-hmm.
So usually what happens is if you're a beginner to Magic, there are different types of cards that you can play that's easier to play. So they are what they're called pre-constructed decks. So there's a deck of 60 cards that have different characters and creatures and different power levels that you can then play with other players to be able to in some ways kind of like battle against each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then depending on you're playing and using, I don't know, kind of like in some ways like chess, right? Like
Okay.
you can look at things a few steps forward and being able to amp up and build up your characters to make them stronger to be able to attack, that kind of stuff. Really, it's about have this just like a collective way of either playing one-on-one or there's more friendly formats where you can play with a group of people.
Cool.
So there's different ways of engaging. And then in the digital side, there's Magic Arena and so forth, where you're able to do that through the screen on a computer and play with people all around the world.
Cool.
But it's really like a strategy game. It's fun. I definitely enjoyed playing it. I was not great at the constructing my own deck part of it, which is why I kind of lean towards having either friends help me build a deck and so forth or playing with a pre-con. But
is there a big difference in designing with considerations for legacy players and existing fan base to then also trying to build a new fan base and new player base? Is it hard to temper the needs?
I mean, Magic has such amazing game designers who are really thinking about the complexities of gameplay. Really, for new players, the focus is really about kind of teaching the basics of the strategies of the game so that then you can use that foundation to continue to build upon that. A lot of that too is kind of providing a simpler, like there's different, well, like when you really get into Magic, there's different formats of play too. And so there's something called modern versus something where you can play with cards. In standard is when you play for the last 3 releases. But for legacy, it's like you get to play with all the sets and releases, right? So like
tens of thousands of cards.
Right. So really it's about like keeping it simple for new players to at least get to the rhythm of the game. And then it's opening it up to kind of the broader ecosystem. But when it comes to the actual gameplay and stuff, like I can't really speak towards that. But the game designers in Magic are really talented and awesome people who really hone in on making things simple. But like for enfranchise, like the complexity of that is pretty amazing. So
at the research position that you were in, how did that work feed into like what the design team was doing versus what game designers were doing? Was there any crossover?
I want to say there are probably a little bit less crossover. So like the game designers definitely had testing where they're working on making sure the playability was working out. So we do a lot of play testing and bring in different types of players to provide feedback. Some of the creative testing, actually, no, that's not true. There's some overlap between the world building team and the game designers when it comes to not only the mechanics of the game, but I'm trying to think how to talk about this without it getting really complex.
It's nice to hear about. Like from the outside looking in, we have no idea how complex it is to build a game system and to continue adding to it. So it's cool to hear that there's so many different teams with like high levels of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. So the role that I had was really being that lead within the studio to kind of initiate testing that was needed for the studio, figuring out kind of the priorities and making sure that we could execute on them. So when I first started, there was a lot more testing wasn't as integrated into the product development process. So my role was really kind of figuring out when would be times to get feedback so that creatives can really use it effectively to be able to actually have it implemented within the product development cycle. So for creative testing, for example, we did some stuff with opening experiences or sustainable packaging for physical tangible, right? Like if you're working on a sustainable packaging where you're switching to a different substrate, but players have expectations of how cars are protected, we want to make sure that we get the feedback for all those things. If you are releasing a new brand called Universes Beyond, being able to get feedback on the new branding logo. With world building, it might be more about new characters or new planes or maybe even existing planes. Like when I was there, long time ago, there was a world of Kamigawa, which was really popular amongst experienced players. But at the time, some of the things that were depicted was not something that was the best and also wouldn't translate into today's world. So it's really thinking about, hey, we want to return to this world. How are we going to make sure that we do it in the best way possible that ties into actual real world connection to Japan, but still being able to kind of deviate and explore what that world could be because it's not actually the real world in which we are in today, right? So being able to get feedback from cultural consultants or people from that background just to make sure that there aren't certain tropes that are hitting that is not hitting right and unintended to, and being able to take that feedback and adjust those things. And then with gameplay, right, it is about playability and making sure, like in Magic, there are certain types of, there's like the 5 mana colors, but being able to make sure that one isn't overly powerful than the other. You want balance across. And so they're testing a lot for those things as well. So
has Wizards always had that level of testing and research, or again, is this like a result of the design involvement that started 10, 15 years ago when your team first got started?
I mean, I would say for game testing and that kind of stuff that was already in existence, there's a consumer insights team there that they've been working with for, a while. I wouldn't say that there isn't initiation for creative testing, but I feel like at least when I was there, I think the biggest challenge for creatives is that a lot of that is more subjective, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't, when you want to talk about a success of a product, be like, hey, as a creative, I did this thing that exactly made it connect to this amount of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
You don't actually know for sure. You can speculate.
Mhm.
So there was testing that, like, for example, I want to say sometimes they were more ad hoc, like when things came up, there was probably more reactionary. And I think this time around, it was more about like, hey, in order to really do proper justice to research and getting the type of feedback you wanting, the team needs to have an idea of the thinking about research. They don't have to be the expert in that, but like thinking a little bit earlier ahead about what those things might be. And then allowing for the research team to also be able to have enough time to execute that properly to get meaningful feedback so that the team can use, right? Because sometimes what will happen is like, oh, we have this thing that came up. We only have this much time. And it's like, oh, that's not like the best amount of time to really dive deep and get into the thing that you're wanting. So it's really like knowing that Magic has this like longer development process, being able to be like, hey, like we actually need to start thinking about something down here to be able to make it so that the team can implement those changes before it gets into manufacturing of the cars and that kind of stuff, right? Like here's the timeline where it's like, no, it's kind of too late. Here's an ideal timeline. Here's like the final check. And for teams to actually know that that was the timing for that versus it kind of being this spin cycle. So that was a lot of the things that I try to help kind of focus on. And then also just working on some of the things like while things were still kind of early exploratory, I guess, or like future thinking, like, oh, here, what are the strategy team thinking about? And being able to get some early, I guess, pulse read feedback so that they can have enough information to kind of make a decision in a direction. So kind of in a lot of different areas of the development cycle.
Yeah.
When you were mentioning the Kamigawa decision-making, how you guys were trying to be more thoughtful about that, it's bringing up for me this idea about like the responsibility that the fantasy game has to be real, but then also, I guess, the opportunities that it affords you guys. Are there any times you could think of where you all were sort of using that space to be creative and play to sort of like encourage your user base to think about something in a new way or push something a little bit further?
I think that an example of something that I know, so like for Universes Beyond, when they were thinking about partnerships, there was Lord of the Rings, right? And there are different ways in which you can approach that. There's kind of more of the movie depiction direction or the book direction. And I think the team that was working on this, like I wasn't a part of this except for the testing research part of it, but really kind of thinking about what ways that could be depicted and what would most resonate with people. So like it is more confined, I would say, for a movie direction, but that's probably what people are more familiar with, depending. And if you go kind of a little bit more book depiction route, then there's more flexibility of not being tied to like certain like actor depictions, but more about like the background of the people and being able to have a little bit more breadth to what that looks like. So like some of the testing that was done was about like depictions of exploring different races.
Mm-hmm.
And I think getting that feedback was really like being open-minded and pushing kind of the idea of what something could be, but also knowing that some players might have certain expectations based on how they have engaged with that brand and being able to explore like what made sense. And I think they were able to actually really push that in the execution of Lord of the Rings.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe the benefit of that to the business? Because I think it's easy for businesses to say, we don't need that type of research, because couldn't you just make the product and get it out as fast as possible? But this is where design and design research can be having a lot of impact. So what is that doing for the users and then like subsequently the brand and like even sales perhaps?
I think, I mean, people and players really do care about how, especially people are depicted in this world. And as you get more diverse fan base from all different backgrounds and cultures, you want to make sure that that is being represented because they will also speak up if it's not right? Like Magic players are, they love the brand and they care about it so much. And when things aren't right, they will speak up about it. But I do think that what's amazing about this company is they really do behind the scenes think about all those things and think about introducing different types of characters, whether they, there's like, I'm pretty sure it was like a non-binary character that was introduced into the plane. And it's something that people in the company within care about too. It's not just about getting the pulse, but like, and getting that feedback. But I think the company also knows it's kind of like the right thing to do and kind of the ethos of the type of company that they want to run. Right. The Magic team really cares about it and the leadership cares about that.
That's nice to hear.
I think you just mentioned that the fan base is like really, really active. And that's sort of a unique element, I think, of this company that you got to work at versus, design things that I've done in the past. What is it like to be really connected to your fans and having an active cycle of feedback and hearing from them a lot while you're working?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what made things the most interesting for me as a designer is, and I'm not diminishing any of my other opportunities working, in designing for kids' toys or designing kitchen gadgets and that kind of stuff. Like in those areas, you are still thinking about the consumer and user and how they use the product, right? But even when I personally was designing kitchen gadgets, for me, there was an element where it got a little harder because it kind of just felt like, well, do we really need this thing? Or are we kind of just designing it because we need to develop this next thing for this next release or that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Where, I mean, I'm a minimalist in my kitchen and I'm like a lot of things you can do with the knife. But again, that's only one type of user profile. And I know that there are others who really can use and benefit from those other things. But I personally had a little bit of a hard time connecting with it as I got into it. Mm-hmm. Where with, something like in the gaming industry, it's like, people are using this as a form of fun. It's a form of them to have community. It's a form of them to just relax and detox from a difficult day or, that kind of having bonding with your family and being able to work on something where you are able to have that connection where like you can go into a game store and you'll meet people you get to actually, meet with people who get excited and talk about the gameplay or the story or how, they're making amazing friendships and community and that kind of stuff, right? Mm. I got to have a chance to go into like visit different stores like in Canada and so forth, and also just visiting here locally. It's just fun to meet people who are that excited about the brand. And so you have more of a connection to be like, okay, like you want to do it justice and you want to be able to make sure that for each release, they're continuing to be delighted with the experience that they're getting to continue on and engage with the brand. So I'm kind of excited to be able to like, start with Pokemon with my son and then maybe, he'll pathway into Magic, right? Or Dungeons and Dragons and then that kind of stuff too. So it's kind of fun to firsthand be able to see that player life cycle and be like, like I've learned about this peripherally. Like this is only one avenue, but I am watching it in that designer standpoint of like, oh, what is the thing that interests you about Pokemon? Oh, really? It's not about gameplay. We're starting to learn now. But his first instant was just all about like, oh, that character looks cool or that card is shiny. And that was it. No, like, let's start playing this game. But then suddenly he kind of wanted to play the game. So we got the starter. And so, so I'm like, okay, now I'm going to watch this pathway and I'll see how that connection happens.
So that circles us back to that question we had earlier is like, since we are on hiatus right now, how does our design past kind of seep into our current daily lives? And it's that around that observation, isn't it? That constant usability. How are people doing things?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's fun through like something that's very specific and tangible, like, his pathway through a trading card game. But I think our brain is always kind of wired to just kind of look at these opportunities in our environment and see like what we can do with that.
Another thing that always really impressed me when we were working with you, when I was at Anvil and working with you at Wizards, was just the depth and the level of thoughtfulness that went into to everything. And we would come and have these design reviews that were like, 2 hours long, and it was all just deep design thinking. And we weren't even at that point, we weren't from an ID standpoint, we were there for structural packaging. We weren't there for the gameplay, but having to understand the gameplay and how that affects the structural packaging and that depth of the passion of the user base is always, that was always really had a big impression on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was so fun working with the guys. Throwing all the concepts on the wall.
Sorry to interrupt. What was the project that the two of you worked on together?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. We worked together a couple of years. There was one year where we had like monthly deliverables of just new ideas. I don't know if you remember that, Christine. It was like,
yeah.
I have this one story where I came in and we were doing some sketch and somebody in the room said, "Oh, I don't like that concept. That looks really expensive." And I was like, "It's just a sketch. I mean, that could be like folded paper or extruded metal or gold plated. What do you mean it looks expensive?" I love the idea. I'm like,
yeah, we worked on a couple of different things. We worked on like something more specific was about just, right, like in Magic, you have these cards that you collect and they range in value, but they're also constructed for playability. And you want to be able to carry these cards to a game store or go to your friend's house and be able to play. So we were really exploring kind of the range of what that deck box carrying experience could be.
Yeah, the packaging as storage, as long-term storage was something that was pretty interesting compared to other packaging categories.
Yeah, and then exploring that, like we've, explored it in like a paper standpoint, but kind of pushing that more into, right, like that product design, varying materials, what would that look like kind of thing.
I really wanted to get extruded metal in there somewhere. I just thought that would be amazing.
I know.
I don't think that ever happened, but
yeah,
sounds expensive.
We also did like, exactly. But we also did like end caps in stores and merchandising opportunities. And because the breadth of what they do there is just really, from an ID perspective, is really fun.
Yeah. And I think there were some points where we're doing some stuff that was a little bit more blue sky, like what if explorations too, just to get some of that potential thinking going. I think that's what some of the monthly deliverables were. But yeah, you kind of reignited my thinking on that one too, Treasure. We did at the time when I was the manager of the packaging team, a lot of in-store experience stuff and like looking at those things three-dimensionally. And
yeah, that makes sense.
So Anvil helped with some of those explorations, but we also implemented a lot of like, instead of it just being a standard poster, like what could that look like that's still compact, that will get people engaged into the story or, whatever that pitch was for that specific release. And there was like a world called Kaladesh, right?
Yeah. And the Planeswalkers. But I remember the high experience, low production, right? There was a really interesting balance there.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit more? High experience, low production?
Well, like a poster is just a thin, flat poster. That's a graphic design situation. But the ones I was thinking of was how are we creating these opportunities where they do have like when you work with like Storm Ballard Mox Boarding House, right? They would have like a release event, and part of the release event would be like a special edition package. But then there would be something that you want to have in the store, not just a life-size cutout of a character, but what can you do in that range of that would help bring people into the world. This was like 15 years ago. So it was kind of, things weren't as experiential as like today, everything is about that experience, right? Like everything is full immersive experience. But back then this was more, can you have like paper boxes that, telescope out of each other and suddenly you have a structure? I can't remember, Christine.
I know. I can't say I remember everything either, but I think that, there was some exploration into AR, VR and that kind of stuff too, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of cool to hear about maybe these like ID roles trailblazing the experience design, like back when it was more novel. And now it's expected, like you said. I think it's also interesting to hear about it starting in a place for like games and toys, which doesn't feel like where you normally attach the experience to. Because like when you think of experience design, it's like really high budget, like Apple and like tech companies or things that they like drop a lot of money. And then the products themselves are maybe overbuilt and like just really expensive and not for, ultimately paper cards.
But that is true. I mean, at that time when you're looking at back to the structural packaging specifically, packaging was usually disposable except for Apple. And then also except for Wizards or for Magic, because it is different than a regular board game where, it's a package, but then it goes under the thing. Like with Magic, you're playing it all the time and you're carrying it with you. So this idea of the packaging being a storage, being a take along, being something transportable. And then I think also during that time, sustainability started coming into the design language a lot more. So I don't know, I wasn't there after that, Christine, but I can imagine sustainability probably had a huge impact over the last decade for sure.
Yeah. I mean, even since I've left, I know that they're making a lot of moves in sustainability now. The company is really focused on reducing waste. And, one of the biggest focus for Magic at the time was we did a lot of efforts in external packaging, but the one thing that wasn't recyclable was, so for those that don't know Magic, the cars are contained in this kind of shiny packaging, but it goes into the landfill. And when you are maybe a more competitive player where you're opening up these booster packs in large volumes, or you're going to a tournament, like when you are in that room and you see how much, like that's a lot of stuff that goes into the landfill. But it takes time, right, to be able to implement those things, because it's not only just about the material and the sustainability, it's about like there is a resonance of how players associate the opening experience and hearing what they call the crackle and the noise, right?
Wow.
And you've been able to do this for so long. Some players, based on the smell, will know which vendor it was produced at.
Oh my God.
The players.
It's like a
Based on
sommelier.
the feel and the smell, they'll know the difference, right? So there's like the really high end, and then there's the other general, like, this is something that I've used to be opening for a few years. If you just suddenly switch it, it's like, hey, my experience with Magic is different. So it's taking that time and feedback to be like, okay, well, what are the kind of priorities for those things? What's the cost? What's the feel, the opening and delight, protection of the cars, because some of those cars are expensive and you don't want that to be damaged before you get it in your hands. So I got to be actually part of a team that got to kind of explore those booster wraps and different wraps, but like alternatives to what that could look like. And we did kind of like a practice release with that on a smaller thing. And at the time, it's like, we're not quite there yet to roll it out. And so there was a pause of that for a few years, but then it came back, and taking the learnings from what didn't work to re-prototyping and reconcepting and trying to figure out how to make, the costing of that make sense for the product too, right? Because it's more expensive. Sustainable packaging is more expensive. So how do you do that without making it, hurt too much on the consumer too?
And all of the plastic sleeves too, right? Like a lot of people will collect their cards and keep them in these plastic sleeves.
Yeah. And I mean, those are kind of all produced by kind of other vendors, right? Like it's not something that Magic distributes generally, and except for some specialty stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that. So being able to do more usability testing, and right, you do as much as you can internally, but you get it in front of other people to make sure that that's something that works out. And the second time around, it was more successful, and we're able to pivot and make some changes, and was able to implement it into more products.
Maybe what they need to do is come up with like a storyline, like not Planeswalkers, but like some really rich story that's like post-apocalyptic, and everything has to be post-consumer waste, and they can make the packaging, the fact that the new Ubi is different because it's new recycled glue or something as part of the experience of the story.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I feel like I would have put like one really expensive card into each sustainability pack so that they like become desirable, and then people are like, they're switching on purpose,
It's an interesting like marketing gaming of that because of the randomization of boosters.
Yeah.
And they're actually not that random.
Oh, Ginger, it sounds like you know more about Magic than you were leading on.
Ginger definitely knows the most.
I'm a nerd. Well, this has been a really awesome conversation and like deep dive into these products that, we didn't know how they're designed, so it's super exciting to hear. We would like to move into our like sort of fun question for all our guests this season, where we invite them to change, replace, or add in something that they think belongs in the 10 Principles of Good Design by Dieter Rams. Big question. I included a little link here to the original 10 Principles. It's not a surprise pop quiz. It's open note.
Yeah. I think the thing that I think for me, I think even for myself, sometimes I have to remind myself to do, because, when you have a problem, so you just go so into the solving mode, is like just really being open-minded and not worrying about where the ideas come from. Collaborative. Yeah, I think sometimes, like, I don't know, maybe it's just in I feel like there are some environments where they kind of put a little bit too much into who came up with the idea, because you're wanting to try to still have that ownership that I brought something. I think that's the thing that I'm terrible at. Like, Treasure, I think you and I were talking about this. You're like, this podcast is a big deal to me because I have to talk about myself. And it's like a thing that I don't love doing. I'm terrible about, being like, yes, I did these things and I'm amazing. Like, I'm such a collaborative thing that in some ways might be a little bit to my detriment. But I think sometimes there's so many like just different constraints of things that will easily be like, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that. But being able to, I guess, just like really dive into that yes and that I'm actually like trying to tell my son. I got to the point where I was saying like, but this. And I'm like, and this.
Yeah.
He actually shifted his saying. He caught himself and said, but and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, that's such a big win because, I can be like, no, we can't do this, or no, that's not safe, or this and that, and be like, and it's even forcing me to be like, okay, I hear what you're saying. And let's also think about this thing. I think a lot of times when you're thinking about all these constraints, it's hard to not get into that hole of like, okay, then what can we do that seems more, I don't know, that kind of diminishes some of the creativity.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of taking a step back. And yes, all those things are still real, but it's something that I try to bring back into the forefront as someone who can be a bit more, constrained.
I think that gets us away from the list as a whole. Like, get away from these constraints and just do something open-minded, unconstrained.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't really thinking about being like, oh, screw the list, but...
Well, I think there's definitely one on the list that I think doesn't make sense with the fact that we're talking about designing for game design. There's one here, one of the number 5, good design is unobtrusive. Like, I don't know how that even makes sense, especially if you're talking about something that is just for delight and enjoyment and experience. And the thing I think we should add here is good design is experience. He doesn't have that on there at all. And I think that's specifically on the theme today of designing for game and for pleasure and for delight.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Christine, for talking to us. And thanks, Treasure, for being our guest host today and helping us out.
I'm so excited we got to speak with Christine. I just think that was so much fun. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you all.
So, Christine, is there any way, if you're open to it, that our listeners can get in touch with you if they have questions or follow along with you in any way?
Yeah, people can, I guess probably the best way is I'm on LinkedIn. You can message me that way.
And as always, find us at wit_Seattle on Instagram, and beyondraypodcast.com is our website for show notes and more content.